My name's Brandon Harrison. I'm Associate Features Programmer here at Doc NYC. I'm very pleased to welcome directors Chris Temple and Zach Ingrasci and editor, co-producer Alejandro Valdés-Rochin to talk about their film, 5 Years North. Welcome, guys.
Thanks for having us.
I love the film. It's an amazing mix of personal story, obviously huge immigration narrative and government. What was the kernel? What was the very beginning that brought this story to where it is now?
So, we actually met the film's main character, Luis, back in 2010. We were working on our first documentary called Living on $1, filming in this small Mayan community in Guatemala. At the time, he was 8 years old. Got to really spend a couple months with his family, with him, and sort of watch over time and going back each year as this 8-year-old, kind of shy 8-year-old kid grew up to become, this outgoing teenager that you see in the film who has 7 Facebook profiles and tens of thousands of Facebook friends. And so we've really known him and his family and kind of developed this relationship for almost a decade now. But we really kicked off production on this film in particular in 2017 when we got this phone call that him and his cousin had attempted to make the journey north. They've hired a coyote, a smuggler, and we're coming north. And it really, we didn't intend to make an immigration documentary. It really just became one. And we immediately started speaking with his family, speaking with him about together really telling the story.
You alluded to, the story that has a, Mayan ground in it. What was it like in terms of both editing and just making the film, of navigating that, and you're double translating, and what was that process like?
Alejandro, do you want to answer this one? It wasn't easy.
No, it wasn't. But fortunately, I think because Zach and Chris have been part, have touched base with this community for such a long time, they had access to sort of a wealth of resources, including people in Guatemala who spoke Cachiquel, which is the language that they speak in Luis's community. So, fortunately for a lot of those things, we had, very detailed translations. Obviously, we were, try using those to build the scenes, etc. They had built up a sort of system to help us with that. And I think the other thing that is important to say here is that we had, given that this relationship had been established, there's access to a lot of very intimate and raw moments that, in not many other people would have had access to, and make the film a very strong piece.
I think the language itself created an intimacy too, that you could tell that with Cachiquel being Luis's main language and for his family as well, there was an intimacy that was captured through that wasn't possible in Spanish, and you could really get so much more of their personalities and conversation across through Cachiquel. And so I think actually the language played a big role in making the film what it is, and it wouldn't have been possible if we just tried to do it in Spanish. And we're extremely thankful. We had 65 translators working on this film. So I actually was emailing with one this morning, telling him an update about the film, and big thank you to all of them for making this possible.
Yeah, I think especially those moments that are captured between Luis and his mom on the phone, the translation is always a bit of delay, and it's kind of like opening a present when you actually find out what's being said, because we speak Spanish, but the Cachiquel moments, we had to wait for the translations. You're just kind of a fly on the wall capturing those moments. And it's kind of like, as we realize those like incredibly beautiful moments between Luis and his family, like over the phone, over Facebook video calls, that became like a huge thread in the film that really, I think, made the film much more emotional and, gave you that insight of what it's like to be a 16-year-old living in New York City, basically on your own without your parents or papers. And I think, you know, that language, like Chris said, Luis was much more comfortable in those moments and willing to, you know, he wasn't put on the spot to like speak to the camera. It just became probably my favorite moments in the film.
You both alluded to, you know, this intimacy with his family. You've been working with them for 10 years, but still this process of him being gone, that's a different sort of film that you're making. What was it like to put that together, to shoot both in New York and then down in Guatemala with his family?
Yeah, it created a couple, first as filmmakers, it was a very strange feeling to know that we had this access, like we you know, as American citizens could go between these two worlds where, you know, when Luis's grandmother passed away, like Luis couldn't go home for that. And it's truly the most unjust and sad, heartbreaking kind of thing to like realize. Just, you know, those are moments that no one should be kept away from. And luckily Luis could be there in some ways on his phone, but it's nothing like being there in person and grieving with, you know, what is. And I think in that moment you see just what this community is, you know, where the entire village comes out and takes his grandmother's casket from their little home to the cemetery. And, you know, the person who's missing is Luis and all these young men who have left home to really provide for their families. And so navigating that in itself was really difficult, just as human beings. And then, you know, I think making sure that Luis's family really knew what we were doing with Luis in New York, working with Luis's immigration lawyer, and just, you know, that was something that we really felt was so important, because this is such a sensitive issue, making sure that we changed his name. He's since moved from all of the locations he's been in. Really protecting him was our first kind of priority as filmmakers. So all those things, navigating those different things is something completely new for us as filmmakers as well.
I wanted to ask about the other side of the story. You have, I mean, which would be a pretty complete film with just Luis's story, but you have the story with Judy. What was it like coming up with this counter story, and also the process of putting together shooting with her on various days out in the field and even in the detention centers?
So, you know, Judy came into the film pretty organically, because we started filming with Luis, as you know, and then we started filming with all of these influences on his life, right? From his teachers to his lawyers to his caseworker, and then ICE was just this huge looming threat and influence on his life as a new immigrant in the U.S., as a 16-year-old kid. He was watching videos on his phone constantly. He's seeing posts on Facebook from others about ICE. He's reading all the, you know, the news stories about the president and the administration targeting collaterals or individuals without criminal records. So, you know, we wanted to explore what ICE meant to him and what that influence was. And so we reached out to them. It took about a year to get permissions from ICE to make sure that we could film with somebody within the agency, and not just to do a single day ride along and get a couple ICE talking points. You know, the key of what we really wanted to do, if we were going to include an ICE narrative, was to make sure that we could go beyond that we could challenge narratives, that we could get the same, in some ways, at least a similar personal nature of what we had with Luis with an individual agent. And Judy became that person for us. And she was a fascinating individual, full of many contradictions and many challenges herself, as a you know, Cuban-American immigrant with a mother who'd spent 42 years resettling refugees. And those were the things that really started interesting us in Judy's story, because it was going beyond what we'd ever seen before. It was going beyond these talking points, and it allowed us, again, kind of a bit more of that parallel intimacy. And I think it's in these moments with Judy, like you see with the Ernest and his family being arrested in the film, because you've gotten to be with Judy and you can see these reactions. I mean, to us, that moment with Ernest being arrested was such a critical thing to include in the film, because it showed Judy's contradictions, and it showed how truly unjust the current immigration system is and is set up, that an individual like Ernest could be arrested, could pay his fines, could serve his time, could be cleared in the sense of all criminal justice in the US, yet years later can be deported. And I think it brought up so many questions around restorative justice, around how and why the system is structured in the way that it was. And I think, these moments, I think, were very, very important for us to include in the film. And I'm sure Zach and Alejandro have some more to add as well.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the film is a portrait of two people. Luis doesn't represent all immigrants, and Judy definitely doesn't represent all ICE agents. I think they both exist in these very gray areas of the immigration system and our current country, especially, Judy, like Chris said, likes to see things in black and white. And like that Ernest moment, nothing is black and white in the immigration system, right? And I think it was really important to show that. And that's why we found, she, like you said, like Luis's story was in itself a film, and Judy, as we had more access and more time, became a bigger part of that film, which Alejandro really helped us shape and think through, because I think we spent a full year or more editing this film. It wasn't a quick process, and it was a really tricky puzzle to put together these two very different stories in the same film.
I would just want to ask, and this is my last question for you guys. This film, when I look at your use of the phone and Luis's phone, and the intimacy of the time spent on that and the ride-alongs with him, and when you get to the reveal that there's been so much anxiety and stress in his life, and even in Judy's life as well, you see this theme of this anxiety and stress considering this situation that we have with immigration. What would you want people to take away about this feeling and this situation that you guys have presented in your film?
Alejandro, do you want to start, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think there is something, I think Zach was talking about the sort of the unjust situation that Luis found himself in when he couldn't go to his grandma's funeral. And I think, actually, given the times, this is something that a lot of people are experiencing, when they cannot attend their relatives' funerals, people who have passed of COVID. We all have become kind of detached from our loved ones to a large extent, or from our sort of social networks. And I think it's, I don't know, I think there is something in today's world that might help us to empathize a little more with people like Luis, and their very, very tough situation, given how, the current situation has sort of turned our world around.
Yeah, to build off that, I think you mentioned the anxiety and this, the mental kind of like strain on Luis as he started, and that those phone conversations were so critical, because that captured this breakdown and like, depression that Luis was dealing with, and anxiety, and I think, we often talk about the immigrant journey, how dangerous it is to walk through the desert, and it doesn't stop there, right? It's the idea of being a 16-year-old in New York City, is by himself, providing for your entire family and 7 siblings, is pretty unimaginable. And I just hope that everyone, feels for the people that are caught in the middle of all this and realizes the human cost and feels a sense of urgency through Luis, and I think through Judy's story of what our current immigration system is doing to real human beings. And, obviously the election, there are ways that things can change, and I really hope we all really commit to that.
Very, 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 very well said. Thank you guys, Alejandro, Chris, Zach. 5 Years North, an amazing film. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate it. Yeah.